Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We're jumping right into this. We promised actionable insights and we're going actionable insights. So we're going like 30 seconds of intro. So there's a million reasons to want a new job. You might be running toward your purpose, or you might be running away from a terrible boss. You may not currently have a job, or you might have a job that to the outside world looks like the dream job, and people are going to be questioning why you're leaving it. The reason for wanting or leaving a job doesn't really matter. What matters is that you get that next job. So we've come together to help. You've got Jonathan and Kara, I know somewhere here in the background, from Pickle, the best job board ever created for clinicians of all types to find clinical and non-clinical jobs, and non-clinicians to find those roles too. It's the job board that we wish we created. So it's got personalization, direct access to the actual posting instead of just an aggregator. And so like the LinkedIn type jobs or some of the job boards that you see that you get excited about a job and then you're like, oh, it's actually no longer on their site. This is direct access to actual jobs. And most importantly, a thoughtful team that listens and will continue to improve the product. Then you've got us at Advancement League, myself, Cache, Antoine. We're here for when you find a job that's a few years away. So that next job, we've got the resources, connections, and events to help you get there. So again, we promised this would be actionable. So right from the beginning, we're going to Jonathan. What is the actual first step someone should take when looking for a new job? So is it, I got to start writing my resume immediately? Is it, I go to the job board first to check what's out there? Do I have to define my target salary or what title I want? What's the actual first move?
But I think the first mistake people make is they send out a million applications for the same resume without knowing how the system works. And so the very, very first tip I would say when you're understanding where you're trying to get a job is actually, are you looking to work for a very, very small company or a very, very big company? And this is pretty simple. I would literally just go on LinkedIn and look the company up for their headcount, because depending on if they're very, very small or very, very large, that's going to dictate who the application goes to. So for example, if you're applying to a company of 10 people, say a startup or a small clinic, more likely than not, the hiring manager is going to be the one who's looking at your resume. So that means when you're applying to that job, you better tell them straight about yourself, right? And be really attractive in terms of what they're looking for. But if you're applying to a really, really big company, they're probably using what's called an applicant tracking system, which means they have a series of robots that filter people out before they even get to a human, right? And the way that these robots work is they look for the exact number of keywords that are in the job description and are they in your application. So actually the first step is, before you even apply, look up the company and see, are they a very small company or a very big company? Because how you then apply, whether you go for a referral or a direct application, or you just email the contact us form on the website, can dictate what's most effective. As a final note, for example, for these very small companies, a lot of times if you click the contact email on the website, it goes straight to the CEO. So why apply when you can actually go straight to the CEO's inbox?
Dang. I see. I think we're taking notes here. I thought we're supposed to be asking the question, answering some questions. We're taking notes. Cache, what's the first move looking for a new job?
So for me, I think I'm very logistical in how I go about applications, and very much in like my Capricorn spirit, I'm a planner. And so I've actually written a template for what I'm looking for next. And before any type of transition, I'm looking to make honestly like a year in advance, 6 months in advance. I'm writing out like 4 key areas, the type of position that I want, and I kind of highlight, do I want to be working on projects? Do I want to be managing people? Do I want to work across a broad area or work on very specific items? Then the scope, do I want to be at a large organization or a small one? Do I want to be at somewhere that manages sites across multiple states or even countries? Or do I want to be more locally? The area, is it patient experience, clinical operations, strategic partnerships? The space I'm in now, I kind of narrow down what areas I'll be interested in. And the last thing is, what do I need to do to reach that goal, short and long term? Whether it's, do I need to go to these conferences to get in front of the type of people that I'm striving, they're the hiring managers for these roles, or I want to seek out certain organizations in the long term and get on their listserv for opportunities. So I make this document, and anytime I see a role that fits into that, automatically I'm having a conversation. But if it doesn't fit into this template, then it's very easy for me then to not even consider it and not have any conversations. And I think in the beginning, when I was doing my searches, it was very hard because every opportunity seemed so like shiny and it was a lot of money. But then I realized that it wasn't fitting into this archetype that I had built based on what I was looking for. And now it's just so much easier for me to decide, go, no, go. Do I even want to consider this role because of what, I've told myself that I've wanted. And so I make this document, and that just makes the process a little bit easier for me to think about.
Are you selling this document? Are you advertising this
Listen, I
document?
built a
How do we get this?
template, so we can share it afterwards if anyone finds value in that. The one I just shared was done maybe like 5 years ago, and so it has 4 criteria items. The one I have now is like 7. So I'm happy to put it out on Advancement League with some guidance.
Bless you. Really cool. And loved hearing the like inner brain work of how you go about it. Antoine, how about you? Are you have the spreadsheet, or you YOLO call a friend?
Could you imagine me having that spreadsheet? I would be a superhero. No spreadsheet, but now that Cache mentioned it, I'll surely be reaching out to her. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah,
All
great.
right, fantastic. So for me, it's always been about people and connections. From my very first internship, which, by the way, since I'm amongst friends, was actually a work study job, but on my resume it says internship. To now my current position, it's always been about knowing one person and being kind to that person. My very first job was an advisor saying, hey, I know a person that knows a person, sitting down with that individual and making a connection. A quick story is that when I graduated my undergrad, Florida State University, we're not doing too hot in football. I moved to Orlando and I needed a job. I had about 2 weeks before the program started. I drove up to the local hospital, which was Florida Hospital East Orlando, and I walked around the lobby. I met an individual who I stayed in touch with to this day, Victor, and said, hey, who's hiring here? Victor said, thank you for being so straightforward. He walked me to a gentleman by the name of Ron Ramira, and they offered me a position as a patient access registrar in their emergency department. It was a weekend shift. I took it. I interviewed. Since that time, I've traveled to Pennsylvania, Detroit, taking on various leadership roles, and now serve as the chief operating officer here at Orlando Health. And even this very job was because I stayed in touch with a woman who was a vice president, and fast forward, and now she's a regional president. And we stayed in touch. She told me about an opportunity, vouched for me, and here I am. So I say my advice is to not only stay in touch with people, but be intentional about not chasing titles. I know folks that will go to LinkedIn before they apply for the job. They'll do the right thing. They'll find someone that works for that company, and they'll start randomly writing VPs, COOs, chiefs. And I'll tell you, those folks are so busy and so inundated with messages that they're the least likely to respond. Reach out to the managers, the directors, the HR individuals that have only been working there for an hour. One, they'll give you real intel to how a company is performing, the inner workings of the culture. Two, they're more than likely be able to pass your resume directly to a real human, and to Jonathan's point, not a robot. So best advice is always connect with the people, rely on the people, and as Alex mentioned, that's something that we try to make a foundation to what we do at the Advancement League.
Cache, I think everyone on this call, there's a bunch of people. So thank you all for joining us, spending some time with us on a Wednesday night. I know you got infinite options of where to spend your time. I bet there's people saying like, we're all competing for the same job. And so there's a lot of people thinking about that spreadsheet of like, hey, we're all maybe looking at the same type of companies. To your point of the shiny ones, we can probably name a couple of them. And there's probably only really a handful that we'd all say like, here's cool roles or here's cool organizations. What are some innovative or maybe less traditional healthcare career paths that you see that are growing in demand?
Absolutely. So since I've been in this role of strategic partnerships where I work a lot with the health plans, I've realized that before I thought health plans were just all about health insurance and the benefits that we get when we apply for health insurance at our jobs. I didn't realize until working in this space pretty closely that they also have clinicians, they also have administrators, they have a whole like clinical operations arm, a policy arm, a financial and strategy arm. And so I would definitely highlight health plans. And I think as much as the health systems have influence, they definitely have just as much, if not more, because oftentimes they're working with federal and government programs. And the amount of money that they have to distribute to provider organizations and health systems, it just blows my mind how much money is out there. So I would definitely highlight the work in health plans and health plan leadership, especially. And the more that I've gone into this space, I come across MHAs, MBAs, and PHs that are working with managed care organizations. And so I just learned a lot, and I feel like I've worked with health plans always, that was something that I've just realized recently. I would definitely highlight the organizations that are kind of on my wish list. So I love sports. I've always thought about, where does my money go? Orange Theory, Peloton, Nike, Lululemon, and all of those organizations have healthcare arms. It might not be the traditional, administrator roles that we're thinking about, but they often need people who know healthcare, who know how to work with clinicians, who understand the healthcare landscape to help them build their healthcare or maybe health and wellness strategies. So one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is where does my money go, and try to go do what I know how to do at those organizations. And I'll just highlight Uber and Lyft. They both have very vast healthcare arms, and someone I know actually runs their healthcare strategy, which is super interesting. So think a lot about the consumer brands. Oftentimes they have a healthcare arm. Not as easy to find because, we're not highlighting them as much in our, undergraduate and graduate school programs, but almost every organization has a healthcare arm. So think about that too. Third is health tech. That's the space that I'm in. Spending a lot of time in New York and San Francisco, I've realized that when I worked in the health system, I thought everything revolved around the hospital, and seeing the amount of private equity and venture capital dollars that go into these ideas before they've even proven anything just blows my mind. And so there's so much opportunity in the health tech space. Of course, we all talk about AI, and there are a number of different sectors within the healthcare world, like oncology and dementia, that are really progressive in the health tech space. But there's always another company that's getting started. And so there's so many opportunities out there, especially for those who have that background to get into the space. And the last one that I'll say is, we talk, as you mentioned, Alex, some of the shiny organizations. One of them, at least that I worked at, was Oak Street Health. And that opened up my mind to how an organization like CVS is getting into the healthcare landscape. And oftentimes we see, Walgreens and Rite Aid, and we don't automatically think about healthcare. But again, because they're such a large brand and large organization in general, they are thinking about how can we build in health, and how can we take care of the people that we already have attributed to us. And so they're buying up healthcare organizations. And so those are other types of organizations that I would consider looking into. Think anyone that's big, Walmart, for example, they have a healthcare arm. And I would say if they have money or a large brand presence, they're getting into the healthcare space. So definitely consider that.
Was a master class. Also, if there's someone on the
Right,
call
that might
that
have been
has
more
never
than what you
considered some of
were
those,
bargaining for. I'm sorry.
no, that was awesome. That's like a really great, because to your point, I think a lot of us went up through either the clinician route, and so you were heads down taking care of patients, or you went through the MHA route, and a lot of those are still referred to as Master of Hospital Administration. And so there's a lot of people that still see the world very hospital centric. So just to hear that you could go work for Walmart or a startup or Nike. Side note, if anyone on the call has never thought about sort of the non-traditional type of landscape and you end up at Nike, I'm a size 11 and a half. I like low tops, Jordans, Jordan 1s specifically. So if you end up at Nike, we're putting the plug. Jonathan, you've had a lot of these roles, both globally on patient care, non-patient care, admin, and you have the platform to see some of the data of what people are searching for. What are you seeing sort of in the trend of maybe career options that are less traditional, but are starting to be more in demand?
Absolutely. And I'll say this, I'll address this from the clinician standpoint. I'm a physical therapist that practiced for almost 8 years. Actually, one of my first jobs was I trained pro athletes at Nike as a physical therapist. So definitely been to the employee store and gotten all the shoes and all other stuff. And I think one thing that's maybe different for people coming with a clinical background is sometimes you feel a bit stuck, right? Because I think you've taken 10 years or more to study for a profession. And the way that school works is they really attract people who are really disciplined and really into overstimulation. So they throw all these things at you at school. So, but then a lot of times when you go into practice, especially if you're in like a subspecialty, you can see the same type of patient every day and it can get kind of repetitive. So it makes sense that if you take a hyper-stimulated person and put them into a patient care repetitive field, you might feel a little stuck, right? And I think what's really fascinating is going back to our first point about what's out there in healthcare for clinicians and non-clinicians. This first point I made about big companies like CVS and like Oak Street, they're awesome, but they function differently than small companies. One of the things that they really emphasize in kind of their like bot reading of resumes is, have you had that title before? And this is obviously really challenging for clinicians because it might take me 10 years to be a clinic director, much less a process improvement specialist or partnerships director or things like that. But what's fascinating is the bots don't actually know for how long you did it or whether you're paid for it. So what's fascinating is, especially if you work in a great small practice as a clinician, you can easily take 2 or 3 hours a week to do process improvement or digital marketing, right? Or business development, partnerships development. Talk to your boss, make a win-win situation. Hey, I know we need to do marketing and business development for our clinic to survive. I want to learn more about it. I'll add it to my workload. And just all you ask for in return is the title. Because now that you've had that title and probably a recommendation or experience from this small clinic, when you apply for that junior partnerships manager role or anything like that at these larger companies, the first tick that the bot sees is that you've had the title before. So this is more about how do you make that transition from a flat clinical growth perspective to like this wide world of tech and beyond. The title really matters, but how you get it can be really, really creative. This is how I did it. I was a PT. I worked in med tech, biotech, big pharma, consulting. I worked at the UN, and then I have a startup. But along the way, what I found is a big gap that I saw was whether you're a doctor or a nurse or a physical therapist, you never really learn how to look for a job in school. And I think those like core skills, things like Cachet brought up, or things like Antoine brought up about like networking and knowing yourself and things like that. We were never really taught this. So understanding kind of how the wider game is played is super important as well. And then from there, you can decide what you really like, find a way to get that title at your current clinic, even for 2-3 hours a week, and then start adding to your skill set and then have that title when you apply to that next role.
I don't play either of these, but I feel like I just got taught the quote chess versus checkers. I was like, just I understand that a little bit. Antoine, there's a lot of follow your passion advice in, especially in the healthcare realm. I think healthcare certainly attracts mission-driven individuals. How can you identify what makes a healthcare role or organization truly meaningful for you personally? How are people out there seeing, like, do you just read the sort of press releases? How do you really understand, like, this is going to be something that I'm driven to go do?
Yeah, I think some of it is failing forward and just figuring things out on the fly. The other is, to Jonathan's point, is truly putting in the work and the research. I think many of us will reach out, will apply for a job before we've talked to three people or spent an hour Googling. So whether you're an undergrad looking for that first role out of college, or you're looking for that next opportunity at a new organization, I don't think anything beats research and being willing to at least interview. You know, Alex, and I think you heard the same advice from Maria here, and that is that, an individual told us at the time that you should aim to have at least 2 interviews every 3 years. And that stuck with me because for the longest we had the stigma, especially, our generation, speaking on behalf of the folks on the call. I know I'm on the elderly end of the millennial cycle, but I think we're all millennials. It was, hey, we're not loyal. You should at least stay at a job for 2 years, 3 years, or you'll be blackballed, like all these things. And you shy away from even applying to roles. I have no intentions on living in Kentucky, but if the executive recruiter reaches out to me to talk about a CEO role, I'm probably going to entertain the conversation, not to waste their time, but to at least to see if I align with that opportunity. So I'll share the same advice that we heard, now 12 years ago, and that is every 3 years, aim to have 1 to 3 interviews. It gives you an opportunity to see if the work that you've been doing, the things that you've been studying, are aligning with the roles that you think you want, and it gives you an opportunity to learn more about those positions that are out there. I've been unsuccessful in getting a role at Nike, probably because I haven't applied, but following this call, I'm going to see if there are some opportunities there. So I think that, for the folks that are on the call, don't be shy or scared to apply to roles, to practice failing forward. Chances are you'll get a lot of bots that send you an automatic decline, but again, take time to connect with folks, do your research, apply to the roles, aim to at least get an interview, because there's no learning better than talking to folks directly.
I was going to tell the story of you working at Nike is my best case scenario. I actually wanted a job at one point in life, and I was like, maybe I'll follow Antoine to Orlando Health. This is like early days in your previous role. And I did the cachet sort of spreadsheet of like, what type of role would I be good at? Where would I like to go? What do they do? What are they prioritizing? And I found this executive leader who was over the division that I was like, I maybe fit there. And I asked Antoine, I was like, hey, I'm coming down to Orlando to visit. Could we meet with that executive? And he said yes. And he didn't know that executive. So he like legit took me along, like tag along to a person that he didn't know. So use some of his organizational capital to meet this executive. So to your point of, it's all about who you know and kind of finding your path, being willing to fail. I think I definitely failed in that interaction.
And that guy still is not talking to me, by the way. So
yeah, he's not talking to us
move
both.
forward with caution.
I'm just kidding.
Story. He loves us.
I want to add,
is there? Yeah, I was going to ask
thing.
Cachet, is there any? I know you spreadsheet it a little bit, but how have you found sort of meaningful roles, or when it's time to leave a meaningful role? When do you find the next meaning?
Yeah, I think that is actually a great question that I spent a lot of time thinking about. Before I answer that, I want to go to something that Antoine mentioned, which is spend time interviewing before you actually interview. And I'm not sure if that's how you meant it, but we saw some questions in advance that talked about how do you transition from non-clinical to clinical, vice versa, or maybe to a different space from the health system to health tech. And for me, I've gone through that transition a couple of times, and I really rely on folks like on this call to say what's happening in the health system. If I've been out of that space and I want to go back in, I want to rely on my close network to kind of catch me up to speed or ask me questions that they would ask folks that they're interviewing. Or in the health tech space, I reached out to a bunch of VC folks to just ask all the questions that I wouldn't want to ask in an interview to them, so it's in a safe space. So I highly recommend, if you want to switch to another space, relying on your personal contacts to first kind of do mock interviews, ask the questions that you want to ask, a recruiter or hiring manager, because that's helped me personally along the way. But Alex, to your question, one of the things that I often think about is what is hot in the industry right now and what skill set don't I have? So when I was transitioning from clinical operations abroad in Abu Dhabi and at Cleveland Clinic, one of the things I was thinking about is, okay, I can come back and do hospital administration in the US, or I can get another skill that I don't already have. And at the time, population health and value-based care was like blowing up. Everybody was talking about it. There were several DOJ investigations on how organizations were making money off of primary care. It was presented at every conference. There was so much happening when it came to population health and value-based care. And in the health system, while we had value-based care initiatives, of course, at the time, like ACOs had already been run out. There were value-based agreements. But in terms of kind of really doing population health in the community, I didn't feel like I had a good understanding of the operations of that in the health system. And so going to an organization, that was basically my filter on what I was going to do next. And so for me, it was about how can I become a better leader in healthcare and what skill set will I need in order to do that. And that also was the reason that I ended up leaving and going for a startup. I had never built something from the ground up, had never done an M&A agreement, had never done credentialing or a survey or accreditation and things like that. And so I feel like every move that I make, it's all about, at least in my early to mid career, it's been about what don't I have and what do I need to get? And I rely on that to really guide what I end up doing next.
I love that. Someone just dropped in the chat. We've talked a little bit about resumes already. And I think, Jonathan, you probably scared a few people I think we all thought the impending robot apocalypse was like a few years away. And it sounds like robots dictate more of our lives today than maybe we thought. Someone said, I've heard that it's not necessary to give a CV anymore, that LinkedIn or Doximity is enough. Is that true? And that's where the question is. You get a lot of conflicting advice about resumes. There's a lot of people that are like, oh, forget about your resume. It's all about who you know, and your resume is not really going to matter. And then others, the very first thing they ask you is, hey, send over your resume. Let me see it. So how important is a resume? And then how do you go about updating yours? Is it a certain frequency that you set? All that.
That's a really good question. I want to answer that question. And also the certifications is like a part of that. So the first question is, do you need a CV? Yes. So the jobs you don't need a CV or a resume for are the ones that are invisible jobs or the ones that use a recruiter. That's about 1 to 2% of roles out there, right? I'm assuming this person who asked this great question is a physician because they said Doximity. Doximity is like LinkedIn for doctors. They actually make 80% of their money from pharmaceutical advertising targeting doctors and a little bit of money from recruiting doctors. So like if you're a physician looking for a physician role and they happen to be using a physician recruiter, Doximity is great, right? But for the vast majority of roles that are recruiter that are not using recruiters, you need a resume. Invisible jobs are like Antoine said, like my person that I'm mentored by got promoted and they have an opening before it even goes public, they call you. That's like an invisible network job. You don't need a resume because they already know you, right? But the vast majority of jobs, you need to have that resume. And then the resume, there's two types of resume data points you should have in your head before you even apply. The first thing you should do is you should take the job description, run it through ChatGPT and say, give me the most frequent words used in this job description. Just number one, especially if it's a company of over 300 people, because they're going to be using an ATS. The second thing, especially if you're doing a pivot meaning into a new type of job or new role, like clinical to non-clinical or admin to operations or things like that, Google a bunch of resumes of people who have had that job already. So for example, product manager resumes, right? Or operations manager resumes, okay? From the keyword search, you have your own resume and kind of understanding where you are, but then you have the other side, people who've gotten the job, how they describe what they've already done. And those two data points allow you to modify what you've done into how this other person who may not be clinical or technical would describe it using the keywords in your keyword counter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it feels like I need to send you my resume already.
Yeah. I see a lot of resumes. And then even if you like send them your resume, what happens is a lot of software will download your LinkedIn into a resume format. I think Kara just put in the chat. And if you've ever gone to your LinkedIn and click the three dots and click download profile, it's awful. It's terrible. So either way, your resume is getting out there. And then this question about certifications, I think this is a really good question too. It depends on what industry you're going into, okay? Let's say you are a operations role and you decide to go back to nursing school, right? And you want to be a nurse. That's awesome. Healthcare is what I like to think of as a tell me world. Tell me what you know embodied by certifications. I'm a critical care nurse, or I'm board certified orthopedics, or XYZ. But if you're going into a non-clinical role, either as a clinician or as an operator, the tech and the business world is actually not a tell me world, it's a show me world, right? So they don't really care about your certifications. They want to know, can you crunch data, right? Can you run an A/B marketing campaign? Can you do the things at a bare minimum in the job description? Because I don't have time to teach you the bare minimum. The way you do this is you start a portfolio while you're learning. So for example, data, you can Google data portfolio. There's a bunch of templates out there. As you're learning R or as you're learning SQL, document it all into a data portfolio. And if I'm a physical therapist applying to a data role, instead of a data certification, you send your resume and you attach your portfolio to that job description. And that way they could see that you actually have the data skills. Lather, rinse, repeat for design, for product, for marketing, XYZ. But going into a non-clinical role is going to be a show me role, right? Less certifications, more about portfolios, more about proof. Going into a healthcare role is going to be a tell me type of scenario. Tell me your certifications. Tell me the courses you took. Tell me where you went to school. Tell me about the hospitals you worked at and like your capabilities, things like that.
Well, Antoine, resume matters, doesn't matter? How much does it matter? What are the sort of tricks that you use to keep yours updated, or do you scramble when a role comes open that you need to have it?
Yeah, so I'm a pterosaurus. By that I mean that I'm a dinosaur, I guess, in definition. I work for a healthcare system. I've been working for a healthcare system. The least cool individual on this call, haven't worked for anything outside of healthcare systems. But I'm a pterosaurus because I can fly, and I think knowing you all allows me to stay in the loop on all the cool things, all the trends, all the awesome opportunities, and of course, annually I get to fill my cup through the Young Health Leader Summit and just see the diversity and talent and roles, etc. And I agree with Jonathan. I think a resume, a CV, in 2024 as the current state timestamp, I think it matters. You know, it's a standard way to tell your story. A process that I've adopted over the last several years is just keeping a templated. Again, ChatGPT helped me build it, but keeping a templated document of the work that I'm doing, and more importantly, the outcomes from that work throughout the year. You know, I'll put a reminder to check in every quarter and document things, because when it's time to apply for a job, you're probably going to miss something. You know, you probably save the file, you can't find it, etc. So I think that real time tracking, storytelling, and documenting the impact, at least for my potential operators or process improvement folks, or folks that also are dying to be dinosaurs, certainly matters. So that's the short answer to that question for sure.
I feel the same as you. We got Cache and Jonathan casually dropping like, oh, when I did this in Singapore, when I did this in Abu Dhabi, like, oh, my last one in London. You're like,
Yeah,
can't even
one
find
day.
some of those places on a map. Leave me alone.
I want to
Um,
throw in something about the
yeah,
resume you brought, but I think it's just like really important. Like, coming from healthcare, we come from the clinical world, we have medical CVs that are like 14 pages long. This is not how the rest of the world works. If you're applying for a level, director level or below, your resume's gotta be 1 page. Like, be brutal. If you're applying for director level and above, it's still probably 1 page, but maybe 2 pages. And like, definitely submit it as a PDF, not as a doc. I've spoken to lots of HR folks who will automatically throw out any resume that's more than 2 pages. They'll automatically throw out things that are poorly formatted as a indicator of this person's like unfairly their attention to detail. And just some systems, when you upload a document instead of a PDF, the formatting doesn't preserve. So like, be brutal, 1 page PDF.
I love that. Well, and yeah, the brutal part and Cache, I think I've seen some of the chat functions go on of just like the bullets really matter. I think that's where you're talking about that brutal part of, and Antoine's sort of highlight reel off to the side of be brutal about here's the outcomes I've achieved, and sort of no fluff on pages 2 through 17. Passion and practicality. I like to think about this in a almost real estate comparison of like, you have your dream home, but there's only certain homes available at a time. And so not that you want to settle for a job, but there is some sort of practicality in the job search of just this is available at this time. Maybe you don't have a job currently, or you're running away from the current job you have. How do you balance that sort of passion versus practicality when you're searching for a healthcare role? Cache, you got, I feel like your Abu Dhabi lifestyle will tell us this.
Um, I I really think it is based on what you're looking for at that time. And I do believe that you can get exactly what you're looking for. Unlike a house, like even from as a high schooler, I had the perfect picture of what I wanted, and I may never be able to reach that. But I do think in every job that I've had, I've loved it so much. And at the time, I didn't think I would want anything different. And I think that's because I focused on what I wanted to have in that moment. And to your point, being practical, like I knew that I wouldn't, there are certain jobs I'm not just going to graduate and then have a C-suite level title, nor do I even want that level of responsibility at that point. And so I think just being very honest with yourself about what the type of experience you want to have. Is it that you want to work really hard and you want to grind and you don't mind, traveling all the time? If that's the case, then you can really consider that when you're looking for opportunities. And that was the case for me. It was like, I don't mind if I'm on the road all the time. I don't mind if I have to travel very far or live out the country. I'm trying to grow and challenge. And so I'm going to take the most difficult roles right now. And maybe the roles that I don't want to do, because that's going to be a means to an end. And because that's what I wanted at that time, I just had such an incredible time traveling the world and doing the work I wanted to do. And so I think you just have to be very honest with yourself about the type of experience you want, and understand that a lot of times, similar to your point, Alex, it's about a means to an end. And unlike houses, because I had really big apartments before I moved to New York, and I feel like I've taken a step back in these closets. But I feel like with your jobs, they naturally kind of build on top of one another if that's the career ladder that you're looking for. And so that's the mindset you have. This is going to get me to that next place. So let me do this and do it very well so that when I'm ready for that next step, I've built up my resume and my skill set to be able to do so. And so I would just say be very honest with yourself about the lifestyle, the work lifestyle you want, and go after that. And hopefully, you have a lot of fun doing it.
Jonathan, key skills. We asked about some of the questioning around like new roles and new opportunities, kind of new jobs that maybe didn't exist that are non-traditional. How about new skills that people need or that would stand out to employers in today's healthcare landscape? I know on Pickle you can choose kind of the personalization path of what skills you have, right? Are there some skills that stand out of like, oh, the people who click these skills like stand out far and above because not enough people have them?
Absolutely. I can actually think of a couple. And so like on Pickle, if you're interested in non-clinical roles, for example, you can click product and tech, you can click data, you can click operations, sales, etc. And I think product is really sexy, but really, really hard to transition into. And the reason why is because product is kind of nebulous. So you have subject matter experts like clinicians who are bringing healthcare expertise into it, but you also have engineers who are bringing technical expertise into it. And then you also have like customer facing salespeople, customer success managers who are trying to get into product as well to bring voice to the customer. So I would say product gets selected a lot, but it's actually really challenging if you don't have at least two of those three skills in the triangle, being technical, customer facing, or industry specific. One thing that I think gets a lot of a bad rep, but actually is really, really good for people coming from a clinical background, is actually anything business development related. And people get this idea that business development is like sales. That's actually not it. So like sales is part of business development, like finding someone to sell your product to. But technically customer success, getting people who have already used your product to love it and keep using it, is a business development function. Partnerships, finding other like-minded groups of people who will also find value in your product, is like business development. It's part of business development. And I think this is really, really important because really, really skilled people who have good bedside manner are really good at business development. The challenge is maybe you don't need to directly sell something, or maybe you find something that you're really passionate about to show the value of, right? So I think that's a skill that is actually a really relatively straightforward transition for clinical people anyway, is like business development. And I think a lot of people in health, we're taught to kind of avoid that side of the brain because we don't want to feel like we're forcing these services on people because they're so expensive. But in the rest of the world, like I would love for someone from Nike to tell me when the new sneakers came out. Like I want to buy them, right? They're really cool, or things like that. I think a third skill that's really nebulous, that's really, really good for clinicians is process improvement and project management. There's this really interesting question in the chat about like, how do you apply to these jobs if they all want 2 or 3 years of experience, right? But the thing is, you use these skills already in clinic. Like the first time I did project management was I set up a journal club for my clinic. Like we set up a monthly journal club, everyone would bring in 3 articles you would talk about. That's a project management experience, right? So healthcare is a business too. Think about all the things that you already do in your clinic, and you can either ask someone who's non-clinical or ask ChatGPT. If you were to call building a journal club something in the business world, what would you call it? Project management, or like product creation, or something like that. So there are ways you have this experience. It's just finding out what the rest of the world calls it, because healthcare is kind of siloed is the challenge, and Gen AI makes it like really easy now.
Incredible advice. So helpful to see how you think and see what data you've seen and the data points. I love just what you call it, like what the rest of the world calls it. So many people do have so many skills. I always say like more people need a hype person in their life than they need some like actual advice. A lot of times you just need someone to say like, you're already doing that. You're enough. You're amazing. You're doing awesome stuff. So some of it's just the language that you use to describe it. Someone put in the chat kind of a silly question, but I've been facing this issue a lot recently with trying to pivot. How should I deal with unresponsive people when trying to connect on LinkedIn to start conversations about roles? I think this is very similar actually to the resume type advice. It's almost networking advice. And so resume, you hear the two things. You hear resumes aren't important or resumes are like the end all be all super important. Networking is very similar in the advice, the like range of advice you get of this is how to network. Here's how to reach out to people. Here's what to do if people aren't responding. Antoine, what do you say about reaching out to people unresponsive on LinkedIn or starting conversations about roles? I think this goes back to just networking and reaching out to people about jobs.
Yeah, virtually, I think it's tough. I think sheer luck and then change of approach. I think the good thing is, oftentimes we forget whether it's a small company or large company, just how many people there are. And again, and I don't want to, stereotype, the approach that you're taking, but more than likely we have these preconceived notions around what titles we got to reach out to or what kind of people we have to reach out to. And I think there's power in rethinking that. It may be the office coordinator at the smallest hospital in that system or the office coordinator at the smallest department in that company that will be the individual that you need to get your resume in front of the right person. Because ultimately what at least for me personally, it's understanding the culture and the structure of an organization, and then to Jonathan's point, trying to get your information in front of a real person. And quite frankly, you don't need a vice president to do that. So that's the advice. It's not over indexing on folks with titles or folks in general, but being strategic and changing your approach, and also reaching out to the unconventional players. Not title driven. Chances are you're going to reach out to a manager, director, admin, supervisor that is shocked that you're reaching out to them, and they'll reply and probably be flattered and want to help you the best way possible. So just getting creative, changing the approach, practicing different things and seeing if you have some opportunity there, leveraging the resources and reaching out to different people, both in person and out of person. It's part of the reason why, Alex and I and that cachet, as we throw annual events, sometimes we scrap name badges because we've all been in the elevator where folks do that little peek, see what your title is and what credentials you have and decide if they want to talk to you or not. And I think that stifles growth and great conversation. So that is my 2 cents.
I'll just add to that, don't take it personally. Some folks don't check their LinkedIns. And I've even, in my research of, trying to penetrate an organization, there are some roles that are super public facing that don't use LinkedIn. And so not everyone uses it, no matter how high or, they may be in an organization or not. Some folks just don't check their messages. And so try not to take it personally. Just like Antoine said, continue changing your approach. I've just realized that as much as we preach, LinkedIn, there's some folks who use Twitter more, and some folks who quite frankly just stay off the space. And I think LinkedIn is also very extrovert heavy and folks that want to be on there. And so remember that too, and just try to keep those various nuances in mind.
Jonathan, there's a question that came up on a clinician brought this forward. So in pursuing non-clinical, non-patient facing opportunities, what are the attitudes towards medical doctors who trained outside of the US? Are we disadvantaged? And
Yes.
so I think that the question is,
The answer is yes.
Yeah, awesome.
The answer is yes. I'll get into that, but I also want to bring up this great point that Antoine and Cachet brought up about networking. Someone gave me a piece of advice when I was going out of clinic into business school that helped me a lot. It's if you ask for stuff, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, they might give you stuff. So like if you ask someone for a referral or ask for someone for an investment, you're not going to get it. But if you're just honest, like, I don't want anything from you. I'm trying to learn. You've been somewhere that I want to be. I know you're super busy. Could you spare 20 minutes of your time so I can learn from you? You'd be surprised at how many people will reach back out to you. So like, don't ask for stuff, ask for advice. About the ex-US trained doctors, you're incredibly disadvantaged, but it's not because of what you think. It's not because your training's looked down upon. It's not. It's because the US immigration system is lottery based. So like for you it doesn't even matter that you're an international doctor. It's about you're a national person. So you are asking a startup, for example, which may have 18 months of runway, to pay an extra 30% and wait 6 months on the hope that you might go through the lottery system of US immigration, right? It's nothing to do with you. It's the logistical hurdles of it, where as a startup, you might be dead. So I'd rather take a chance on someone here who can start right now, because I don't want to wait 6 months for you to get denied by immigration because of a piece of paperwork, because there's only 3 people on my team right now, and I don't even know how to do our own taxes, right? So that's what I mean when I say that international doctors are disadvantaged for non-clinical startup roles. It's because the immigration ecosystem in the US makes it really challenging for startups to sponsor and hire someone internationally, especially at a smaller level. As startups grow, though, or even as companies grow, let's say they open an office internationally, an internal transfer is more feasible. But getting an external hire into these early stage startups, even if they just raised $10 million, like, tough, but not because of you.
We got a few more minutes here. What we talked about a little bit, mistakes that you see people make, either mistakes on resume, mistakes in networking. Are there other things that stand out to you as you've now hired people, as you see the data of where people are going? What are the biggest mistakes that people can avoid just in the job search process? Jonathan, go ahead.
Is that to me?
Yeah.
Oh, sending the same resume to every job. That's a big one. And that goes back to, like, did you research the company? Are they a big company? What keywords are they screening for before it reaches to a human? Like, sending the same resume word for word to every job, it makes you feel really good because you're doing something. But I find it to be super crushing to my mental health because rejection really hurts. So like, kind of take care of yourselves mentally as well. It's like a long life, a long career. And in the short term, it feels like you're doing something, but not setting yourself up for success for that short term kind of dopamine hit of applying to these jobs can be really challenging long term to not only your career, but how you view yourself, which shouldn't happen. Like, you're super important. You're a great person.
And I would add just reaching out, too early, either applying too early, reaching out too early. I know that nice folks exist, me being one of them. I've kind of made a personal goal that if an individual reaches out, right approach and a resume, like, I'm going to forward it to someone in HR. That's just what I do. But if you reach out, you haven't even looked at the job board, you don't even know where you want to live or if you're willing to relocate, that's less likely to get a response or energy or action from an individual. So take your time, do your research, know kind of what you want, what you qualify for, and then reach out.
One question's coming in. Cache, appreciate you. I think both of you, Anton and Jonathan as well, I've seen you jump in the chat, already connecting with people, saying you'll be helpful. Love to see it. Hussein says, can you give some tips for moving? I'm planning to go from South Florida to Houston. I have a fresh MBA, very varied past, including clinic admin, medical device design, along with lifeguarding. So he's hit the full circle of things. I want to slide into a health system, was looking at admin fellowships as an option. Also would love to work in startups. Any suggestions or resume advice, sort of how you go from one place and a world that you've created there to a whole nother place and the world that you need to create there? Any tips for him?
I'll just start with understand who the players are. Houston and Texas in general is a huge healthcare market in terms of the health systems that are there. And so start with that, understand what type of roles that they're looking for, and just tailor your resume to those organizations. Like Houston Methodist, I think Memorial Hermann is in Houston. There's some really large organizations there. And so do your best to kind of tailor your experience to the roles that you're finding are hiring. And then also can talk about admin fellowships, separate process since it seems like you've already graduated. So we can spend some time personally offline on that.
Love that. One last question in here of, are there questions that you like to ask at the end? I think this goes back to, actually, I think this gets to a few of the questions, touches on it. It says, are there questions that you like to ask at the end, the Q&A portion of an interview, to help you stand out as a candidate? I think we've probably touched on it a little bit, of just pursuing your passion and pursuing sort of what's the role actually like, and what's the, if you've narrowed it down, like this is you really trying to get it. But any advice on just asking questions once you've reached that stage of an interview?
I would just say
Antoine.
absolutely have great questions ready to go. Some of the questions that I've asked are, what are the challenges that you're focusing on right now? What do the next 3 to 5 years look like in terms of this role? What things are they going to be working on? What are some of your recent successes that you're proud of as an organization? Have questions that don't relate to the role specifically, but more globally as an organization, that gets the person that you're interviewing with thinking. I also have like maybe a list of 50 to 75 questions that I built when I was an admin fellow that we can perhaps put on our Advancement League site as well to share. So I'll send that to y'all, Alex and Antoine.
Awesome. Templates.
And then I'll say I always ask what the individual does for fun outside of work. One, because I want to make sure they have a life outside of work and see what I'm getting myself into. And two, because you just learn that people connect well to family or sports or outdoor living, and getting that individual talking about life, um, warms their heart, gets them talking, strikes their dopamine. Scientifically proven. It's a great book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But that question usually gets folks, kind of disarms them, and not critically thinking, but makes them remember you, and hopefully gives you an opportunity to see if you connect with them. If they're skydiving, not necessarily a connection point for me in this season, but at least gives you a shot to see if you can connect with them on a different level.
Do you think there's going to be a season of your life where skydiving's the thing?
Yeah, I got a story to tell. I was almost there, and the car broke down, so it was God talking. So we'll try again here in the next year or so.
Let
You'll
me
be
go
there.
with you. I've gone
All right,
twice. I'm trying to
all
get my
right.
third one
Say,
in, you
all
know?
right, let's do it. Let's do it.
Cache, Jonathan, Gara, Antoine, this was incredible. Furious note taking by the attendees that I can see the faces and things, and so much great. Thank you so much for all of the engagement in the chat. Everyone was really asking questions and getting answers, and helping each other. You see people on the call helping each other is awesome. I think the biggest, what we said in the beginning of just, it doesn't really matter why you're looking for a job, but we know you may be looking for a job. There may come a point in time where your dream job turns into not your dream job. There may come a point in time you need to move, all of those things. And so no matter what the situation is, why you're looking for a job, we just cannot be rooting for you and excited for you, and can't wait to see how you shape the future of health, no matter where you end up shaping that future of health. It could be like Cache and Jonathan and globe trotting, and me and Antoine could be catching up someday. You don't know. So it could be in some far-flung country. It could be for a medical device organization. It could be for a shoe and fashion and apparel. It could be for food, or it could be back to a clinician. You could start as a non-clinician and go become a clinician at any point, or vice versa. So we just reiterate how excited we are for you to see where you land, all of you on this call. And we'll come out with, I think we heard quite a bit of a few templates that we need. Cache's book that she's writing, we heard that loud and clear. Jonathan's got some stuff coming for us. So we'll put it all together in a package and send it out to everyone's emails as well, so that we can make it easy on everyone. But really excited for all of your futures and to get to follow along to all your successes. Thanks for joining us tonight.